Jeremy Birmingham from LettermanRow.com joins us now. And Jeremy, we can throw all these things out the window. Ohio State has never lost as an underdog under Urban Meyer. Ohio State hasn't been an underdog since 2015, the national championship game. Michigan hasn't won in Columbus since 2000. Michigan has been favored to win this game since 2011. None of that matters because it is the game, Ohio State and Michigan, and you literally can throw the record book out the window.
Yeah, I think what matters is not what we've seen over the last 15 years, 17 years. What matters is what we've watched over the last, 10 weeks. And we've seen Ohio State be a fairly inconsistent football team. We've seen Michigan, after the opening season opening loss against Notre Dame, be pretty consistent. So I think what matters is how Ohio State adjusts with 1 week to go for a game that means everything, and not just for the programs, but for the national championship races, for the Big Ten, for coaches' careers at this point. It pretty much is one of the biggest Ohio State-Michigan games of my lifetime, with all the things that are on the line.
Urban Meyer 6-0 against Michigan, but the fact of the matter is that very easily could be 4-2, 3-3, maybe even 2-4. So while he has dominated the series, outside of the 2015 game, Ohio State hasn't dominated the games against Michigan. They just dominated the outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, you watched last year, the Buckeyes won by 11 points in Ann Arbor. The final score reflects a comfortable win, but it certainly wasn't. 2013, the Buckeyes had to defend a 2-point conversion at the end of the game against a very bad Michigan team. Obviously, 2016, we watched as J.T. Barrett had to get 1 inch to advance the game in overtime for the Buckeyes to pull that out. So it's not a game that's ever been comfortable for Ohio State fans, even though the success that they've known in the last 16 years is so egregiously different than it was the previous 20. But there's not a lot of confidence among Ohio State fans. But I know that Urban Meyer and his team are not taking on that, woe is us mentality. They're going out and they're going to be ready to play on Saturday.
Let's talk a little about Michigan. Obviously, this is the top defense in the nation. Their defensive line, very strong. Their linebackers are very strong. Their secondary is a very veteran group, yet that secondary is perhaps the most suspect area of a very strong defense. And it's a secondary that is maybe a little susceptible to an up-tempo attack, and we've seen Ohio State be its most effective when they do go up-tempo.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because you think about Michigan's defense, right, and you think about how good that group is. Rashawn Gary, Chase Winovich, who his status may be up in the air, the linebackers with Devin Bush and Josh Metellus and these guys. But the secondary is the area, as you said, that sort of gets the reputation as the weak link. But Michigan's #1 in the country against the pass. So is that because their linebackers and defensive line gets to the quarterback the way they do? Is it just the pressure they're putting on? If you want to really help the back end of your defense, the way you do that is by rushing the quarterback. So for me, what matters about Ohio State is not the tempo necessarily that they go with on Saturday, but how well do they protect Dwayne Haskins? How easily can they keep him on his feet? We watched 2 years ago in 2016, Isaiah Prince got absolutely abused against Michigan. This defensive line is as good or better than it was 2 years ago. So for me, the Buckeyes' key is keeping Dwayne Haskins upright and giving him a chance to throw the ball. Because if the Buckeyes, with their very good wide receiving group, can just get time, I think you can find openings in the Michigan defense to get them to back off a little bit so that the Buckeyes can then establish the run game.
How big of a factor is Dwayne Haskins rushing 15 times for a career-high 59 yards against Maryland? Does that give Don Brown and that Michigan defense a reason to not necessarily crash in on those RPOs?
Well, I think the one thing that really gives them that fear should be what Dwayne Haskins did against Michigan a year ago, because they saw him when he was really able to move. And I think that there has been a conscious decision by Ohio State for the most part of this season to keep him in the pocket and let him throw the ball and let the running backs do their thing. But again, we've watched the Buckeyes sort of turn away from the RPO offense, which is really, I think, in my mind, sort of kept the offensive linemen from being aggressive when they're in run block situations because they know what they have to do now. To me, that's a big change for the Buckeyes. You've seen the offensive line dominate games in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, again, 52 points to 51 on Saturday against Maryland, but the offense put up 700 yards. Against Michigan State in the second half of that game, the Buckeyes were able to come out and really establish the run with Mike Weber. I think that's the important thing, is they need to know what their job is, and sometimes the RPO stuff is confusing.
Is this Ohio State offense the best offense Michigan has faced?
I think it has to be considered that. I mean, if you think about where Notre Dame's offense was at that time of the year, it's not where their offense is now. I think with the current iteration of the Notre Dame offense, with Dexter Williams back and with Ian Book at quarterback. I think that maybe changes things. But again, if Dwayne Haskins gets time to throw, this will be not like anything Michigan has seen this season. But that Michigan front seven is unlike anything Ohio State has seen this season as well. We watched Michigan State, who was the #1 run defense in the country. They blitzed a lot, but that was just all from the pressure. Really, was all from the defensive line, and I think that's what Michigan's going to hope to do, is to drop their linebackers and just get to the quarterback with the defensive line.
You mentioned the Notre Dame game. This Michigan defense has improved by leaps and bounds since week 1 against Notre Dame, and Shea Patterson has gotten more comfortable. Like Ed Warner offensive lines did at Ohio State, his offensive line in Michigan has improved each and every week. So this is a Michigan offense that is obviously going up against an Ohio State defense, which is licking its wounds after giving up those 51 points to Maryland. And schematically, there's a lot of reasons why you'd think Michigan's offense will have some success against Ohio State. We know Michigan loves to use the tight ends, loves to use the running backs, and Ohio State's linebackers have been so inconsistent this season. That leads some people to think Michigan's going to have no problem scoring against Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm not in that train of thought. To me, I think what Michigan has is a really, pounded out offense, and I think that actually plays into what Ohio State does well. I don't believe that Karan Higdon is the type of running back like Anthony McFarland we watched last week, who has that immediate burst and really shifty at the line of scrimmage.
Higdon's been compared to almost water torture, where you're going to get 3-4 yards at a pop. He's not going to hit that big home run, but at the end of the day, he's going to have 100, 125 yards because he's just consistently getting those 3-4 yards.
Yeah, I think Ohio State fans would be thrilled if Karan Higdon had 25 carries for 125 yards. I think that's an okay day. Michigan's offensive line is big. It's talented. Ed Warner is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country and has been for years. But for me, what worries me about the Michigan offense for the Ohio State defense is how Shea Patterson moves around in the pocket, and what you were talking about, the tight end, the little swing plays to the tight ends, and then occasionally taking that shot downfield because Donovan Peoples-Jones is very good. The Buckeyes cornerbacks have been a little bit underwhelming this season because I think there's so much pressure on them to make a play down the field because the run game has been beating the Buckeyes so bad that I think they're being a little hesitant and reluctant to really just play aggressive, because when they're getting flagged for something every game. I don't believe, though, that Michigan's offense, is the type of offense that will give Ohio State the trouble that Purdue and Maryland and these other teams that they've struggled with this year will, because Michigan's offense isn't based on all that motion and misdirection and all that stuff. So they're going to try to line it up and punch them in the face, which is what Michigan State did. Obviously, Michigan's talent on offense is at a higher level than the Spartans, but I think a lot of scheme-wise it's going to be that same kind of, we're just going to out-tough you, and that's, I think, a good thing for Ohio State.
One of the storylines that you could not ignore watching the Ohio State-Maryland game was Urban Meyer. The producers of that game on television made a conscious effort to spotlight Urban and his reactions. And we've both watched Urban Meyer on the sidelines for 7.5 seasons. And quite frankly, what I saw on Saturday wasn't much different than what I've seen from Urban Meyer at all the last 7.5 years.
No, to me, it's the exact same. I've watched Urban Meyer on the sideline from here to there, doing this after every play Ohio State gives up, screaming, bending over at every timeout, looking uncomfortable. That's what he does. He's not a guy that is on the sideline cheering and celebrating very often. He's constantly sort of looks like he's in agony when his team is underperforming, which they've done at a remarkable clip this season. So I don't think that there's anything different about his on-field actions or his sideline persona. But I do think, obviously, and he admitted as such, that, yeah, he's had some issues this year health-wise. So I think people are just looking for a way to run with the story and trying to get ahead, I think, if he decides to step away or something like that because of the arachnid cyst in his brain, that they're able to pinpoint it and say, oh, we showed you this was happening. But I don't think it's any different than normal.
Just 12 seniors on this year's team for Ohio State, several of those on the offensive line. So there's going to have to be an influx of offensive line talent into this program. And we know the Michigan game is always a big game for recruiting for Ohio State. We know Whitmer's Kevon Butler is planning on being in Columbus on the official visit this weekend. And Ohio State got other recruiting news this past week that perhaps points to a rather big offensive lineman maybe coming to Columbus.
Who?
Eichenberg.
He's a linebacker.
He's a linebacker?
Yeah.
Wow. Why did I think he was an offensive lineman?
Because his brother Liam was a linebacker at Notre Dame.
There you go.
Tommy Eichenberg, who you talk about, though, this is actually going to be an Ohio State-Michigan battle for Tommy Eichenberg. He's a linebacker from Cleveland St. Ignatius, a four-star kid, one of Ohio's best linebackers. He committed to Boston College in the summer and was really kind of hell-bent on going to Boston College. He likes what they do defensively. He likes what Steve Adazio does. But Ohio State offered, then Michigan offered. He visited Michigan for the game against Penn State. He's visiting Ohio State this weekend for the Michigan game. And things are going to kind of go all speed, full speed ahead between Ohio State and Michigan. He's going to take official visits to both those schools in December or January before making a decision, probably not till February. So it'll be interesting to see what Ohio State does, because it's hard for the Buckeyes at this point to go to a linebacker and say, hey, you should play in our system over Don Brown's system. So there's a lot of moving parts. Don Brown is obviously a guy that could be looked at for other jobs, whether it's NFL defensive coordinator jobs or even head coaching jobs, because he's done such a great job at Boston College and now at Michigan. So Tommy Eichenberg, his brother Liam, who played at Notre Dame, Tommy grew up an Ohio State fan, whereas Liam was not. So it's interesting to see how this unfolds. But for the Buckeyes, they're glad to have him open-minded heading into this game this weekend.
Getting back to the game, Jeremy and I both grew up here in Toledo, both West Toledo. What's your earliest memory of Ohio State, Michigan?
Honestly, I don't ever remember not remembering Ohio State, Michigan. For me, it's just about that day is what football was. You grow up in Toledo. That day, you're outside at 8 a.m. playing football in the yard with your friends and family. And I remember just being a kid, and you would just kind of peek your head in the house and check the score, but then you were still back out in the yard playing. First time I went to an Ohio State-Michigan game was 1996. When Sean Springs slipped and fell and Ty Streets had the 86-yard touchdown to beat Ohio State 13-9. And, it's a rivalry that sort of defined your entire year when you were a kid in Toledo. And I don't know if it still does anymore, and maybe it does, but I'm not a kid anymore. So the whole momentum of the rivalry has flipped so much in the last 17 years. But it's been pretty wild. To be able to say that this will be my 6th time on the field for this game, taking photos, is pretty insane, to be honest.
My first Ohio State-Michigan game was 1982, and I do remember a couple days before that game at school, and a kid asked me, who did I like, Ohio or Michigan in the game? And I remember saying to him, the Bobcats are playing the Wolverines?
Well,
I was 6 years old at the time and knew the difference between Ohio and Ohio State.
Yeah, for me, the first real game memory I had was 1987 and Earl Bruce's last game. I was 9 years old. You watching that, you see the Earl headbands and Chris Spielman and those guys out there, and the Buckeyes totally underdogs in Ann Arbor and going out there and winning one for Earl Bruce. And I don't know if this is going to be Urban Meyer's last Ohio State-Michigan game, but I do feel like there would be some sort of symmetry to the first one that Earl's not at,
right,
being Urban's last one. Could really provide for some weird emotional jolt for the Buckeyes on Saturday.
And Urban Meyer did admit on Monday he does think about that 1987 game quite a bit. Jeremy Birmingham from LettermanRow.com, thank you for joining us.